Okay, everyone. So in today's video, I'm joined with Clearcode CEO Piotr Bananczyk and Clearcode's head of engineering Grzegorz Łukasiewicz. I hope I pronounced both your names correctly. Excellent. And the topic we're going to be talking about in today's video is all about third-party cookies. Over the past few years, we've seen a lot of media reports about various things connected with third-party cookies. More recently, we've seen a lot of news in Google Chrome. Obviously, in January last year, they announced that they would be shutting off support for third-party cookies. But prior to that, we saw a number of changes implemented in Safari and also Firefox. And both of those browsers have ultimately turned off support for third-party cookies over the past couple of years. So in today's video, we're really going to sort of dive in a bit to this whole third-party cookie topic and really address the questions regarding, first of all, what third-party cookies are, but more importantly, what role they play in programmatic advertising, and of course, what impact a world without third-party cookies, basically what impact there will be for programmatic advertising in a world without third-party cookies. So we've got a whole bunch of questions lined up today that I'll be asking Piotr and Grzegorz. So maybe to start off with, I'll head over to you, Banan, and if you could just talk to us a little bit about what cookies are, because for a lot of people, no doubt, advertisers and publishers, there's a lot of sort of, bit of maybe not confusion, but I think for a lot of people, they might not actually understand what cookies are. So maybe if you could just tell us a little bit about what they are and what sort of roles they have, just in a general sense.
Yeah, so since I am not the technical one here, I will try to simplify it a lot. So think about the cookies as small files that are being created in context of the given domain to improve or simplify your web experience. So those can be like information, the information stored in this file can be related with, for example, the language that you have chosen, the history of product that you have seen, all those activity-related information that then, after you will get back to the website, can improve your experience, which means like you don't need to select the language second time. Maybe based on your browsing history, you will see additional products that are suggested to you based on the, as I said, history. All those things that require some information to store, but not necessarily while having an access to the account and the database. Probably a bit more technical view or overview over them is something that Greg can also provide. And Greg, would you like to add something here?
So there is not really much difference between the first-party cookie and third-party cookie in the technical context. They are both the same. The difference is in how they are being created. And the main point here is that the first-party cookies are created by the domain that you are requested. So whenever you enter the URL in the browser, the website can create a cookie for you, and that's the first-party cookie. The third-party cookie is created for the domain that you never intended to visit. So whenever there is a piece of code that is loaded from other domain that you are requesting, it can create the cookie as well. And that's what's called third-party cookie. Just because whenever you interact with some website, there is a third party that try to get in between and gain something for themselves. In this case, when we are talking about the cookies, the main goal of the cookies within the AdTech environment is to assign you an ID as a user, as a visitor. So then we can recognize you better later on and personalize, for example, advertisement for you by recognizing that it is you on some other domain. So that's from the technical perspective, how we can create the cookies. We can create them server side and we can create them front end side. So the front-end side is obviously using the JavaScript, some scripting language that they have built-in methods to create the cookies. And the server side is focused on calling the third-party server. And that's the most popular way, I suppose, for now, for creating those third-party cookies. That's why we have some add-ons that are blocking the third-party requests to not create those cookies, because we can recognize those third-party requests pretty easily.
Yeah, cool. So maybe I can jump in here and just ask a couple more questions about that, or maybe just elaborate on what you both have just said there about the difference between first-party and third-party cookies. As you just said, Grzegorz, there is really no difference from the technical side between a first-party and third-party cookie. But as you said, it all has to do with the context, right? So as you said, first-party cookies are created by the website that someone is visiting, and third-party cookies are essentially all cookies created by domains other than that website that the user is visiting. I think a lot of people, no doubt, would have heard about third-party cookies being referred to as tracking cookies or third-party trackers. They're essentially the same thing, right? That websites add some AdTech platforms code or script to their web page, and then each time the web page loads, that those requests are sent out to the AdTech platform server, and the third-party cookies are created that way, right?
Yes, that's correct. So the cookies are holding the ID of you for that specific system. So let's say we have the system ABC that is creating a third-party cookie for you. The reason that they are called third-party trackers is because if we can load the script from this ABC company on some different domain, then we can also track your behavior within that domain. So imagine if you are visiting the e-commerce, for example, because we assign you an ID, we can also send some events to this third-party server with your ID as well. So we can build up the history of what you have done on this website, on this specific website, and having this data from different sources, different websites, different domains, but built in the same way. So the structure is the same, and the value is basically the same. We can build a pretty good idea on how you interact with websites, what you are looking for, how long you are on the website of specific profile, and then we can assess what you are interested in and what's not, what's maybe not very interesting for you, and that how the history of people are built in the AdTech.
Yeah, the problem, and I think that we will also cover this during this meeting, is that is this a good thing that the external resources are aware of what we are doing, and is there a reasonable way of controlling who actually has an access to the data and the history? But this is something that probably Mike will also ask us during this meeting, as I believe.
Definitely, I've definitely got a lot of those questions lined up towards the end. So yeah, excellent. Thanks for that. So Grzegorz, just maybe staying on this again, this topic of third-party cookies. You mentioned a moment ago that they are mainly used. I mean, the key role, essentially, the starting point for third-party cookies is identification. As you said, companies store an ID within the third-party cookies, and then, as you just mentioned, it can be used to identify that same person across multiple different websites, and collect data and match that data with those cookies there. But when we're talking about some of the media buying processes, such as real-time bidding, where there are multiple ad tech platforms involved in the process, on the buy side, you've got demand-side platforms. You also might have DMPs connected to them. Then you've got ad exchanges, SSPs, even ad servers as well. As we just mentioned, one of the main limitations of both first-party and third-party cookies is that they can only be read by the domain that created them. So if a DSP creates a cookie for one particular user, and if an SSP creates its own cookie for that user, both of those two different platforms are going to have different cookie IDs, right? So there needs to be a way to match those cookies together, and that's why we have this cookie syncing process. So maybe if you could just talk just a little bit more about what cookie syncing is, and explain a little bit more about the problem and also how it's carried out.
Yeah, sure. One clarification, the access to the cookie has the domain that it was created for, and you as a user. This is important distinction, because you can at any point of time in most modern browsers look through the cookies that are created for you, and even delete them and manipulate them if needed. But in topic of the cookie syncing is something that is very simple in its nature, but it's very, very hard to describe simply, to put it simply. But I will try here. So the main idea of cookie syncing is to maybe the goal of the cookie syncing is to have a greater pool of cookie IDs, so the identifiable users, in order to have a better chance of hitting someone with an ad that potentially can buy our product, right? So that's the goal. How it's done, it's when we said that we are creating the cookie when you are visiting the website. If it's done on the front end side, so through the JavaScript, for example, we can send the request for the to create a cookie ID. This cookie ID, this request will hit the third-party server that will respond with the set cookie header that will create the cookie. But from that point, we can know what the cookie ID is. So when we send another request to some other third party, we can carry over this cookie ID as well. And at that point, the second third party server will know exactly what the cookie what the cookie is that they are creating during the request, and also what was the cookie ID for the different platform. And they can match them together. So they can store them somewhere in the storage, in the database, wherever it's feasible. And they can assign that, okay, for the platform ABC, the cookie ID is 123. For our platform, the cookie ID is XYZ. So we know that ABC 123 and XYZ is the same person, basically. And that's how the syncing between different third-party AdTech platforms is being done. And as I said, the goal is to recognize as many users as possible to make the campaigns as optimal as possible. When we talk about advertisers,
when we are talking about the cookie syncing, also the profile merging is a term that we can hear about often, because what is happening is that the same person may have two separate various identities in the internet. Like on the set of the website, I can have a history A. On the other set of the website, I can have a history B. And now during the cookie syncing process, both services can learn about each other, that the user A in the service A is actually a user B in the service B, match the profile, and then build the even bigger history of this given profile. I guess that we do have an article on the Clearcode website on how the cookie syncing works in details. So I would definitely suggest to go there. As Greg said, even though it's a very basic term, it's really hard to explain it in an easy way.
Yeah, I think that one more thing that is worth mentioning here is that when we talk about profile merging in context of cookie syncing, that can be done also independently on the device. So we can match profiles from you as a visitor on your mobile phone and your PC, for example. Mm-hmm. And this is done through recognizing a common identifier. Let's say you are logging with your email, for example, on 2 different platforms, from your mobile and from your PC, with the pretty good accuracy, we can state that you are the same person. So now we know exactly who you are on your mobile and on your PC as well. So that is also something that is happening on a daily basis.
Sure.
Cool. Excellent. All right. So just moving on slightly, I'll go back to you, Banan. And so now that we've sort of know what, how third-party cookies work, and obviously cookie syncing as well, which is also a very key process for many different, programmatic advertising parts, media buying, etc. Maybe just talk to us about some of the main use cases even of third-party cookies, or more so, what are they actually used for in programmatic advertising? So we know that the key thing is identity, but once you've got identity, what can you do next?
The main goal for the advertisers is to minimize their spend and maximize their return of investment. To achieve it, they basically need to target their campaigns to some specific sets of people, which we are calling audiences. Now, if I have a travel agency, it will be beneficial for me to, for example, target summer offer on the Ibiza to some specific demographic, but also probably it will be even better if I can target it to the people who have seen recently a similar holiday offers. So the third-party cookies and the ability to exchange the history, ability to exchange the information about the profiles with the external vendors allows us to group those people, those profiles, those IDs into the groups that we call segments or sometimes audiences, and then allow the advertisers to simply target them. So this is the most basic use case, targeting and retargeting. Of course, that's not everything, because I can display those ads on multiple websites. So I would like to understand whether the person that I'm trying to reach has seen a specific number, a given ad specific number of times, because I can assume that after the 15th time, this ad may not be efficient anymore. So the frequency capping, the measurement, all those are also a role of the third-party cookies. And there's also a term we call attribution that is there to basically understand which action was responsible for the conversion. So maybe was it the first ad or the last one, or however you would like to break down this attribution. So just to summarize, those third-party cookies allows us to track those people across multiple sites, understand what they were doing, and based on it, target the content, the message, the ad to them.
Yeah, and by the conversion, we mean the end goal of the campaign. So whatever it is, buying a product or visiting something or filling the form or whatever it is, that's the goal for the campaign.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, thanks for that, Banan. So all those things you just mentioned are obviously key processes that are part of every single digital advertising campaign. And all of those, as we just mentioned, are underpinned by third-party cookies. So I suppose that's in many ways that's why this whole end of third-party cookies topic is such a big deal for programmatic advertising, because certainly you'll still be able to run some kind of targeting, maybe even frequency capping, measurement attribution without third-party cookies, particularly with some of the other solutions that are being proposed. But the key difference is that scale. You're not going to be able to get the same scale across multiple different websites without third-party cookies. So I think that's one of the main, probably one of the biggest things that is going to impact programmatic advertising is just the fact that the scale, as far as targeting, frequency capping, measurement attribution is going to be severely impacted.
That's true, and this is why the whole debate in terms of how the AdTech ecosystem will look like after the death of third-party cookie. So this is the whole purpose and reason. But I think that would be worth also to mention why even this is a topic. Why? We talked about those good sides of cookies, because technically I would rather like to see the ad that is targeted to me, and if I I will see this ad anyway. So I would rather like to see the ad of something that I'm interested in than totally random one. So technically, based on what we have said, those third-party cookies are a good thing, but there is also a problem/challenge here. 1 second, my laptop is running out of the power. Just one moment. So here's the thing. As I mentioned earlier, the fact that you can send this this event history to the external resources and they can even do it further got us to the point in which there were studies, and the 90% of your history is known by more than 90 companies, which means that basically for 90 companies, and no one is ever will be able to control them all, knows basically whole your browsing history. So let's all do hope that they are doing this as a sign of goodwill. But there is even more. There is access of more than 600 companies to 50% of your history, which basically makes this like no one controls it. So the problem here is that Apple, Firefox, Apple, Mozilla said that they will simply block third-party cookies because this is not something that that is their interest to mess with the privacy. But Google, that owns basically largest ad network in the world, cannot simply remove those cookies. Like they cannot say, okay, so let's remove third-party cookies and then let's cut our revenue by half, I guess. What's even more, the Google made some research, and when you are disallowing contextual, not contextual, but audience targeting, behavioral targeting, the revenue can also drop significantly by half, which means that the solution that needs to happen is, A, we don't want to have a cookies because this is a huge privacy issue, but B, we need to find something that will allow us to maintain the existing ecosystem or maintain the existing numbers in the new ecosystem that they will create. And this is whole story behind the today's discussion. So why we had those third-party cookies and what will happen now. The good thing is that those discussions that I mentioned at the beginning are happening, and ideas like Flock, Turtledove, measurement APIs, those are there to replace something that I think we can call it was used as a hack, like tracking the doing the AdTech using 1 pixel GIFs and third-party cookies to track the identity is like a hacking internet, and maybe as a result of what is going on, we will receive a real life fitted to the need API that we will start using properly as a result of those. So to summarize, like the demand is there. We need to be able to track, to target the people, to retarget them. However, not in a way it would allow some companies to affect our privacy.
Yeah, and also like the important thing contextual to understand here is that because there may be a question, so why don't just remove the third-party cookies and the problem would be solved, right? But the AdTech itself is a $1 million cash flow through those systems. It's not like if we can see like what are the prices for the campaigns to show like a couple of ads, it's not really significant. But the ecosystem is very large and very potent when it comes to amount of money that goes through.
Yeah.
So that's why the companies that earn money or maybe lose less, for example, when it comes to advertisers, because they can pinpoint who will see their ads, so they optimize the cost that way. And the publishers that are actually earning money on displaying those ads on their websites, they all will lose, right? Mm-hmm. And in the meantime, the platforms that this whole process is executed with, like for example the Google Ad Network, will also lose their share of the revenue, right?
Exactly.
So that's why this isn't that easy of a step to do for them, and that's understandable. But yeah, definitely there is an area that we need to fix because of those.
on the Mozilla can have a narrative that they are being privacy protectors, that they are like doing everything to maintain their privacy, while Google is not, which is putting them into the bad position immediately. So they need to do something. However, they cannot be as like they need to remember that their business is actually an AdTech. So this is something that needs to happen. And also what you have said, Greg, is right, because if you think about the big publishers, like, I don't know, Z5 or New York Times, or I don't know, any publisher that has a scale, they can build their own walled garden self-serve platform and maintain basically the ad spend, the ad income, ad revenue, ad related revenue based on those walled gardens. However, those small, medium publishers that they were relying on this programmatic advertisement will not be able to achieve the such scale anytime soon, which is basically that sentence for them.
Yep, definitely.
And we also saw the movement of going to the walled gardens and relying on the first-party cookies exclusively for those bigger publishers.
Yes, exactly. And this is already happening.
Yeah, you guys have raised some really really fantastic points, and I think we could probably produce another video solely on those things that you mentioned there. But I think for today's video we can maybe wrap it up, and I think in the next video we can talk more about Google Chrome's privacy sandbox, because this is one of the let's say alternatives that's floating out there with regards to the whole end of third-party cookies, because no doubt both advertisers, agencies, publishers, even ad tech companies are all looking for solutions or alternatives for the end of third-party cookies. And there are many different solutions out there, and of course Google has proposed its own through this privacy sandbox, and that in itself is quite a dense topic, but it's one that we can cover in a bit more depth in the next video. So yeah, I think did you guys want to add anything else before we finish up?
Maybe that we are excited that the changes are coming, and looking forward to see what will happen during the next couple of years. Definitely those will be exciting ones.
Yeah, definitely. I absolutely agree. I think that, when we look at the main issues with privacy at the moment, they are technical challenges, right? And really the only way to solve them is through technical solutions, right? And obviously as a development company, that's obviously quite a positive thing for us, because it means we get to work on things that haven't really been built yet, or even explored. So yeah, I definitely agree that the future is quite interesting. No doubt there's a lot of challenges, but I think as an industry, there's been a lot of innovations over the years, and I think this is just another challenge that we'll have to deal with. But yeah, as you said, very exciting.
Exactly.
So yeah, cool. All right, well, thanks very much for your time, guys. And yeah, as we said, there'll be a follow-up video where we talk about the privacy sandbox in a bit more detail. So yeah, keep your eye out for that one.